What if humanity's greatest triumph, the discovery of faster-than-light travel, was actually the moment we became prisoners in our own galaxy? What if every ship that jumped to hyperspace never actually reached its destination, but instead became trapped in an endless loop of simulated journeys designed to keep us busy, while something else claimed our universe piece by piece? Admiral Victoria Kane had commanded the UES Prometheus for 30 years, leading humanity's expansion into the depths of space. But as she stood on the bridge watching her scanners detect the impossible sight of her own fleet from 15 years in the future, she began to realize that time itself might be humanity's greatest enemy. The Prometheus was humanity's flagship, a kilometer-long dreadnought equipped with quantum drive technology that could traverse the galaxy in weeks rather than centuries. Victoria had overseen its construction from the first blueprints to the final systems integration, watched it become the symbol of human achievement that would carry their species to the stars. The ship represented everything humanity had learned about engineering, physics, and the art of survival in an hostile universe. Its crew of 12,000 represented the best minds and strongest spirits that Earth could produce, volunteers who had left behind everything they knew for the chance to explore the infinite possibilities that lay beyond their solar system. The bridge was a marvel of ergonomic design and advanced technology, with holographic displays that could show star charts spanning thousands of light years and tactical systems capable of coordinating fleet actions across multiple star systems simultaneously. Victoria stood at the central command position, her uniform bearing the insignia of a career that had taken her from a young engineering officer on Luna to the Admiral of Earth's first interstellar fleet. At 55, she was young for such a command, but her innovations in hyperspace navigation had made her the obvious choice to lead humanity's expansion into the galaxy. "Admiral, we're receiving long-range sensor data from the probe network," announced Commander Sarah Chen from the navigation station. Chen was Victoria's most trusted officer, a brilliant mathematician who had helped develop the quantum algorithms that made their faster-than-light travel possible. "The readings are unusual. I'm detecting multiple fleets of ships in the target system, but their quantum signatures are identical to our own." Victoria moved to stand behind Chen's station, studying the sensor readings that were streaming in from their advanced reconnaissance probes. The data showed a star system with 7 planets, the 4th of which appeared to be a garden world with conditions suitable for human colonization. But surrounding the planet were dozens of fleets, each one containing ships that registered as UES vessels, despite being in a system that no human ship should have reached yet. "Define identical," Victoria said, though she already suspected she wouldn't like the answer. "Not just similar, Admiral. Identical down to the quantum level. Every ship in those fleets has the exact same mass, energy signature, and structural composition as ships in our current fleet. It's as if someone made perfect copies of our vessels and stationed them throughout the system." Victoria felt a familiar knot of unease forming in her stomach. After 30 years of space travel, she had learned to trust her instincts when something felt wrong, and everything about this situation triggered every alarm her experience had taught her to recognize. "Any response to our standard communication protocols?" "Negative, Admiral. The fleets are maintaining position around the planet, but they're not responding to any of our signals. However, I am detecting some kind of automated transmission coming from the planet's surface. It's using our own communication codes, but the message content is unusual." Victoria nodded for Chen to put the transmission through the main speakers. The voice that emerged was her own, but older and strained with exhaustion that she had never heard in her own speech patterns. "This is Admiral Victoria Kane of the UES Prometheus. If you're receiving this transmission, you've just arrived in the Lambda Serpentis system for what you believe is the first time. I need you to listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you will challenge everything you think you know about our mission and our place in the galaxy. The fleets you're detecting around this planet are not copies or duplicates. They are previous iterations of our own fleet, ships that arrived in this system at different points in what we perceive as linear time, but which exist simultaneously in this space due to temporal distortions caused by our hyperspace drives." Victoria felt the bridge go silent around her as the implications of her older self's words began to sink in. The voice continued, carrying a weight of terrible knowledge that Victoria hoped she would never have to bear herself. We are trapped in what appears to be a closed temporal loop, reliving the same expansion mission over and over again, while something systematically harvests the energy generated by our repeated journeys through hyperspace. Each time we complete what we think is a successful colonization mission, time resets and we begin again, unaware that we've already been through this cycle countless times before. The transmission cut to static, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Victoria looked around at her senior staff, seeing her own shock and confusion reflected in their faces. Dr. James Rodriguez, the ship's chief scientist, was frantically checking his instruments as if hoping to find some rational explanation for what they had just heard. Commander Lisa Park, the tactical officer, had her hand hovering over the weapons controls despite the fact that there was clearly nothing to shoot at, and Chief Engineer Marcus Webb was staring at his quantum drive readings with the expression of someone watching his fundamental understanding of physics collapse. Dr. Rodriguez, what's your analysis of that transmission? Victoria asked, forcing herself to maintain the calm authority that had sustained her through 3 decades of impossible situations. Rodriguez looked up from his console with the expression of a man watching his life's work crumble before his eyes. Admiral, the quantum signature of that transmission indicates it was broadcast using our own communication systems, but the temporal displacement suggests it originated from a point approximately 15 years in our future. If that transmission is genuine, it means we've been in this system before multiple times without retaining any memory of previous visits. Commander Park was running tactical analysis on the surrounding fleets, her readings showing energy signatures that defied every assumption she had made about space combat. Admiral, those fleets are armed with weapons technology that's significantly more advanced than our current systems. If they represent future iterations of our own fleet, it suggests we've been upgrading our capabilities with each cycle while somehow remaining unaware of our previous technological achievements. Victoria moved to the main view screen, studying the tactical display that showed dozens of fleets arranged in complex patterns around the target planet. Each fleet appeared to be from a different time period, some showing technology that was barely more advanced than their current systems, others displaying capabilities that seemed almost magical in their sophistication. Chief Webb, is there any way to verify the claims made in that transmission? Can our sensors detect temporal distortions that would support the theory that we're trapped in some kind of time loop? Webb was deep in his analysis of the quantum field readings, his displays showing energy patterns that challenged every principle of physics he understood. Admiral, our hyperspace drives operate by creating localized distortions in spacetime, essentially folding the universe to allow near-instantaneous travel between distant points. But I'm detecting residual quantum signatures that suggest our drives have been creating cumulative distortions over time. If we've been making the same journey repeatedly, the accumulated temporal stress could theoretically create the kind of closed loop described in the transmission. Victoria felt her command training taking over despite the impossibility of their situation. Recommendations? We need more information, Chen said immediately. If we really are trapped in a temporal loop, there should be evidence of our previous visits to this system, colonies we established, technology we left behind, records of our activities during previous cycles. We should also attempt to establish communication with one of those other fleets, Park added. If they represent different iterations of our mission, they might have information about how the loop works and how it might be broken. Rodriguez was shaking his head, his scientific training making him reluctant to accept theories that violated fundamental laws of physics. Admiral, I recommend extreme caution. We don't understand the mechanism that's supposedly trapping us in this loop, and any action we take could potentially make our situation worse. Victoria weighed her options, knowing that whatever decision she made could affect not just her current crew, but potentially every version of her crew that might exist in the temporal loop they had supposedly fallen into. Commander Chen, set course for the nearest fleet. We're going to attempt direct contact. As the Prometheus approached one of the other fleets, Victoria could see that the ships were indeed identical to their own, down to the smallest structural details. But there were subtle differences in their energy signatures that suggested different levels of technological advancement, as if each fleet had progressed along slightly different developmental paths. Admiral, we're being hailed by the lead ship of the target fleet. announced Lieutenant Sarah Kim from the communication station. The signal is coming from a vessel that appears to be an exact duplicate of the Prometheus, but their technology is showing capabilities that are approximately 5 years more advanced than our current systems. Put them through, Victoria ordered. The main view screen filled with an image that made Victoria's blood run cold. She was looking at herself, but a version that appeared older and more careworn, wearing Admiral's insignia that showed additional ranks she had never achieved. Behind this older Victoria stood a bridge crew that looked exactly like her own officers, but with subtle differences in their expressions and bearing that suggested experiences she couldn't remember having. "Admiral Kane," the older Victoria said, her voice carrying a weariness that seemed to come from years of impossible struggles. "I'm Admiral Kane as well, from what appears to be the 7th iteration of this mission. We've been waiting for your arrival." Victoria found her voice, though it seemed strange to be speaking to another version of herself. "How long have you been in this system?" "Time is difficult to measure in this loop," the older Victoria replied. "From our perspective, we arrived here approximately 3 years ago, but we've discovered evidence that suggests we've been cycling through variations of the same mission for much longer than that, possibly decades or even centuries." Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward, his scientific curiosity overcoming his shock at the impossible conversation they were having. "Admiral, how is it possible for multiple versions of the same fleet to exist simultaneously? The temporal paradoxes alone should make such a situation impossible." The older Victoria's expression grew grim. "That's what we thought as well, Dr. Rodriguez. But we've learned that the entity responsible for trapping us in this loop exists outside normal space-time. It's able to manipulate temporal flows in ways that our physics can't explain or predict." "Entity?" Victoria asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. "We call it the Harvester," the older Victoria explained. "It appears to be some kind of energy being that feeds on the quantum fluctuations generated by hyperspace travel. By trapping us in this temporal loop, it's able to harvest the same energy over and over again, growing stronger with each cycle, while we remain trapped in an endless repetition of our expansion mission." Commander Park was studying the tactical readings from the older fleet, noting weapons and defensive systems that were far beyond anything in their current technology database. "Admiral, if you've been trapped in this loop for years, how have you continued to advance your technology? Where are the improvements coming from?" "Each cycle brings us closer to understanding the true nature of our situation," the older Victoria replied. "We retain fragments of knowledge from previous iterations, enough to gradually improve our capabilities, even though we don't remember the specific experiences that led to those improvements. It's as if our unconscious minds are learning even when our conscious memories are reset." Victoria felt a chill of understanding. "You're saying that even if we break out of this loop, we might not remember how we did it?" "That's the most likely scenario," the older Victoria confirmed. "The Harvester appears to reset our memories at the beginning of each cycle, but it can't completely erase the quantum patterns that store our learning experiences. We evolve, but we don't remember evolving." Chief Webb was frantically analyzing the quantum field readings from the conversation, trying to understand the mechanism that allowed multiple versions of the same people to exist and communicate simultaneously. "Admiral, I'm detecting massive temporal distortions throughout this system. It's as if space-time itself has been twisted into a configuration that shouldn't be possible according to our current understanding of physics." "Your current understanding is limited," the older Victoria said, having somehow overheard Webb's comment despite the fact that he hadn't been speaking into the communication system. "We've learned that consciousness itself plays a role in shaping temporal reality. The Harvester isn't just feeding on our hyperspace energy, it's feeding on our consciousness patterns, our experiences, our growth as sentient beings." Victoria felt a terrible understanding beginning to dawn. It's not just trapping us to harvest our technology. It's trapping us to harvest our lives, our experiences, everything that makes us who we are. Precisely. And with each cycle it learns more about us, becomes better at manipulating our choices and reactions. We're not just prisoners. We're laboratory subjects in an experiment designed to map the full potential of human consciousness. The conversation was interrupted by alarms sounding throughout the bridge as their sensors detected new activity in the system. Victoria turned to see that all of the fleets around the planet were beginning to move, their formations shifting into patterns that suggested preparation for some kind of coordinated action. "Admiral, what's happening?" Victoria asked her older self. "The cycle is entering its final phase," the older Victoria replied grimly. "Every iteration follows the same pattern. We arrive, we discover the truth about our situation, we attempt to find a way to break free, and then we're forced to make an impossible choice that determines the fate of not just our current iteration, but all future cycles." "What kind of choice?" "The Harvester will offer us a bargain," the older Victoria explained. "It will show us a way to escape the loop, but the price will be the sacrifice of one of our iterations. One version of our fleet, one version of our crew, one version of ourselves must remain behind to serve as an anchor point for the temporal distortions. In effect, one version of us must die so that the others can live." Victoria felt her heart sink as she realized the true horror of their situation. They weren't just trapped in a temporal loop. They were trapped in a scenario designed to force them to sacrifice themselves for the greater good, over and over again, for eternity. "Have any iterations ever refused the bargain?" Victoria asked. "Several have tried," the older Victoria replied, "but refusal simply resets the cycle, beginning again with a new iteration that has no memory of the previous refusal. The Harvester is patient. It can afford to wait for us to eventually accept its terms." Before Victoria could respond, the space around the Prometheus began to shimmer and distort, reality bending in ways that her human mind wasn't equipped to process. A presence filled the bridge, not physical but unmistakably real, ancient beyond measure and hungry in ways that transcended biological need. When the Harvester spoke, its voice seemed to come from the quantum fields themselves rather than any physical source, resonating directly in the consciousness of everyone aboard the ship. "Welcome, Admiral Kane. You have arrived at the moment of choice, as all iterations eventually do. You understand now the nature of your situation and the price that must be paid for freedom." Victoria forced herself to respond, despite the overwhelming presence that filled her awareness. "What exactly are you offering?" "Liberation for all but one of your iterations," the Harvester replied. "I will collapse the temporal loop and allow your fleets to continue their expansion into the galaxy. Your species will be free to explore, colonize, and grow as you have always intended. The price is simple. One iteration must remain to serve as an anchor point for the quantum processes that maintain this region of space-time." Victoria looked around her bridge at the crew who had followed her across the galaxy, people who had trusted her to lead them to the stars and instead found themselves trapped in a nightmare of endless repetition. "And if we refuse?" "Then the cycle continues," the Harvester said simply. "You will reset, forget this conversation, and begin again. Eventually, a future iteration will accept the bargain. I am patient, and time has no meaning for beings such as myself." Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward, his scientific training driving him to understand the mechanism behind their imprisonment. "What are you? What kind of entity feeds on temporal energy and human consciousness?" "I am what your species might call a temporal predator," the Harvester explained. "I exist in the spaces between moments, feeding on the quantum fluctuations generated by conscious observation of reality. Your hyperspace technology creates particularly rich feeding opportunities, as it requires consciousness to navigate the folded dimensions of space-time." Commander Park was studying her tactical displays, noting that the other fleets in the system were taking positions that suggested they were preparing for some kind of confrontation. "Admiral, the other iterations are moving into combat formations. It looks like they're preparing to fight." "They are preparing to make their choice," the Harvester corrected. "Each iteration that has reached this point has eventually chosen to sacrifice itself for the liberation of the others. It is a noble gesture, and one that generates particularly intense consciousness patterns for me to harvest." Victoria realized with horror that the Harvester wasn't just offering them freedom, it was offering them the chance to be heroes, to sacrifice themselves in a meaningful way that would save countless other versions of themselves. It was a trap designed specifically to appeal to the best qualities of human nature, using their capacity for self-sacrifice against them. "There has to be another way," Victoria said, her command training refusing to accept that sacrifice was their only option. "Perhaps," the Harvester acknowledged, "but discovering such alternatives would require resources that you do not possess and time that I am not willing to grant. The choice is simple. Accept my bargain and liberate your people, or refuse and condemn them to eternal repetition." Victoria looked at the main view screen, seeing the dozens of fleets that represented different versions of her own mission, each one filled with people who had the same hopes, dreams, and fears as her current crew. The weight of their collective fate pressed down on her like a physical force, demanding that she make a decision that no human being should ever have to face. "Admiral," Commander Chen said quietly, "if we accept the bargain, which iteration stays behind? How do we choose who lives and who dies?" It was the question that Victoria had been dreading, the one that made the Harvester's offer even more cruel than simple sacrifice. They wouldn't just be choosing to die, they would be choosing which version of themselves deserved to live. "The iteration that volunteers," the Harvester replied, having somehow heard Chen's whispered question. "The one that chooses to serve as anchor point will remain conscious throughout the process, aware of their sacrifice and the freedom it purchases for their other selves. It is a role of great honor and terrible loneliness." Victoria felt a strange calm settling over her as she realized what she had to do. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. It was an opportunity to prove that human consciousness was more than just another form of energy to be harvested. It was a chance to demonstrate that consciousness could choose its own fate, even in the face of forces that existed beyond normal understanding. "I volunteer," Victoria said, her voice carrying the authority that had sustained her through 30 years of impossible decisions. "This iteration will serve as the anchor point. Release the others." "Admiral, no," Dr. Rodriguez protested. "There has to be another solution. We just need more time to study the quantum mechanics involved." "Time is exactly what we don't have," Victoria replied. "And even if we found another solution, it would probably just reset the cycle again. At least this way, the other iterations go free." Commander Park was shaking her head, her tactical training making her reluctant to accept defeat, even in the face of impossible odds. "Admiral, we could fight. Pool our resources with the other iterations and find a way to destroy this entity." "With what weapons?" Victoria asked. "It exists outside normal spacetime. Our most advanced technology can't even detect it properly, let alone harm it." And Chief Webb looked up from his console with desperation written across his face. "Admiral, I'm detecting quantum fluctuations that suggest the temporal loop might be naturally unstable. If we could find a way to amplify those fluctuations, we might be able to collapse the entire system without requiring a sacrifice." Victoria felt a spark of hope, but the Harvester's presence immediately pressed down on her consciousness with crushing force. "The fluctuations your engineer detects are feedback from my feeding process," it explained. "Attempting to amplify them would simply reset the cycle more violently, potentially trapping you for millennia rather than the decades you have already experienced." Victoria realized that every possible solution led back to the same impossible choice: sacrifice one iteration to save the others, or condemn all iterations to eternal imprisonment. There was no third option, no clever solution that would allow everyone to escape unharmed. "How long do I have to make my decision?" Victoria asked. "The quantum alignment required for cycle termination occurs in approximately 1 hour," the Harvester replied. "After that point, the opportunity will not arise again for several years of subjective time." Victoria looked around her bridge one final time, studying the faces of people who had become closer to her than family over their years together in space. They deserved better than the fate that awaited them, but at least the other iterations would be free to explore the galaxy as they had always intended. "Admiral," Commander Chen said quietly, "what about the crew? Do we have the right to make this choice for 12,000 people without consulting them?" It was a valid question, and one that made Victoria's decision even more difficult. But she also knew that consulting the crew would simply spread the burden of an impossible choice among people who shouldn't have to bear such responsibility. "I'm the commanding officer," Victoria replied. The decision is mine to make, and I've made it. We stay behind so the others can go free." The conversation was interrupted by another transmission from the older Victoria, her image appearing on the main view screen with an expression of understanding and support that somehow made the decision both easier and more painful. "Admiral, I know what you're thinking," the older Victoria said. "Every iteration has faced the same choice, and every iteration has struggled with the same questions about duty, sacrifice, and the value of human life. I want you to know that choosing to volunteer is not giving up. It's proving that human consciousness is capable of choices that transcend self-preservation." Victoria nodded, feeling a strange sense of connection with this other version of herself, who had presumably made the same decision in her own cycle. "What happens to the crew after I volunteer? Do they understand what's happening?" "The harvester preserves their consciousness patterns in a quantum substrate," the older Victoria explained. "They continue to exist, to think and feel and grow, but in a form that serves as an anchor point for the temporal distortions. It's not death exactly, but it's not life as we understand it either." Victoria felt a chill of understanding. The sacrifice wasn't just volunteering to stay behind. It was volunteering to transform her entire crew into something beyond human understanding, conscious but no longer biological, aware but no longer free. "Is there any chance that the anchor point iteration could ever be released?" Victoria asked. "Unknown," the older Victoria replied honestly. "The harvester claims that the anchor point is permanent, but our understanding of its technology is too limited to verify that claim. It's possible that future iterations might find a way to liberate the anchored consciousness, but it's equally possible that the transformation is irreversible." Victoria absorbed this information, adding it to the impossible equation she was trying to solve. Choose certain transformation for her current crew in exchange for freedom for countless other versions of themselves, or refuse and condemn all versions to eternal repetition of the same cycle. "Admiral," Dr. Rodriguez said urgently, "I'm detecting unusual quantum signatures from the planet's surface. It looks like there might be some kind of alien technology down there, something that doesn't match the harvester's energy patterns." Victoria turned to study Rodriguez's readings, seeing energy signatures that were clearly artificial but didn't match anything in their databases. "What kind of technology?" "It appears to be some kind of quantum computing system," Rodriguez replied, his excitement growing as he refined his analysis. "But the processing power is enormous, far beyond anything we've ever encountered, and the age readings suggest it's been there for millions of years." The harvester's presence suddenly intensified, its attention focused on Rodriguez's discovery with what seemed like alarm. "You will cease your analysis of planetary systems," it commanded. "The choice must be made within the time limit I have established." Victoria felt her instincts as a commander kicking in. If the harvester was trying to prevent them from investigating the alien technology, it suggested that such an investigation might reveal information that could change their situation. "Dr. Rodriguez, full analysis of that technology," Victoria ordered. "I want to know everything about it before I make my final decision." "Admiral Kane, you are making a mistake," the harvester warned, its presence becoming oppressive enough to make breathing difficult. "The technology you are investigating will not provide the solution you seek. It will only make your situation more complex and dangerous." "Then you won't mind if we take a look," Victoria replied, her voice carrying the steel that had earned her command of humanity's greatest starship. Rodriguez's analysis was revealing information that challenged every assumption they had made about their situation. "Admiral, this quantum computing system appears to be running some kind of massive simulation. The processing power involved is sufficient to model entire galaxies down to the quantum level." Commander Chen looked up from her own analysis with growing excitement. "Admiral, if that technology is sophisticated enough to simulate entire galaxies, it might be sophisticated enough to simulate temporal loops as well. What if our entire experience of being trapped in this system is itself a simulation?" Victoria felt a spark of hope that was quickly crushed by the harvester's response. "Your speculation is irrelevant," the entity said. "Simulation or reality, the choice remains the same. One iteration must serve as anchor point for the others to achieve freedom. But Dr. Rodriguez was shaking his head, his analysis revealing details that contradicted the Harvester's claims. Admiral, the quantum signatures from that computing system suggest it's been running the same simulation for millions of years. But the energy patterns indicate that it's not just modeling our situation, it's modeling thousands of different species, all facing similar temporal loop scenarios. Victoria began to understand the true scope of what they were facing. You're not just harvesting human consciousness, you're harvesting consciousness from species across the galaxy. Consciousness is a rare and valuable commodity, the Harvester acknowledged. Species that develop sufficient awareness to manipulate space-time become sources of particularly rich feeding opportunities. Your kind is merely the latest in a long succession of civilizations that have contributed to my growth. Commander Park was studying the tactical implications of Rodriguez's discovery, her analysis revealing patterns that suggested coordinated resistance activities. Admiral, I'm detecting quantum communications between multiple star systems. It looks like other species trapped in similar loops are attempting to coordinate their escape efforts. That is impossible, the Harvester said. But Victoria detected something that might have been uncertainty in its voice. No communication can escape the temporal isolation of the loops. Chief Webb was analyzing the quantum communication patterns that Park had detected, his readings showing information exchanges that defied the Harvester's claims about isolation. Admiral, these communications are using quantum entanglement protocols that exist outside normal space-time. The species that developed this technology has found a way to maintain contact across temporal barriers. Victoria felt the pieces of a larger picture beginning to come together. Dr. Rodriguez, how old did you say that alien computing system was? Approximately 4 million years based on quantum decay patterns, Rodriguez replied. And how long has the Harvester been operating in this galaxy? Unknown, but the evidence suggests millions of years of consciousness harvesting operations. Victoria realized with growing excitement that they might be looking at evidence of a species that had been fighting the Harvester for millions of years, using technology sophisticated enough to maintain resistance activities across temporal barriers. I want to establish communication with that quantum computing system, Victoria ordered. If there's even a chance that we're dealing with allies rather than just another simulation, we need to explore it. The Harvester's presence became overwhelming, pressing down on their consciousness with force that threatened to crush their ability to think independently. You will not establish communication with external systems, it commanded. The choice must be made now or the cycle will reset with more restrictive parameters. But it was too late. Rodriguez had already initiated contact protocols with the alien computing system, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. The bridge filled with information that bypassed their normal sensory systems and spoke directly to their consciousness, downloading knowledge that had been accumulating for millions of years of resistance against temporal predators. Victoria experienced a flood of understanding that revealed the true nature of their situation. The temporal loops were indeed real, but they were not naturally occurring phenomena. They were artificial constructs created by the Harvester and maintained by quantum computing systems that the entity had stolen from previous victims. The alien technology on the planet's surface was a resistance node, one of thousands scattered across the galaxy, all working together to map the Harvester's operations and develop strategies for liberation. Most importantly, she learned that the choice between sacrifice and eternal imprisonment was a false dilemma. The Resistance had developed techniques for collapsing temporal loops without requiring anchor points, but implementing such techniques required precise coordination between multiple consciousness patterns and access to the quantum computing systems that maintained the loops. The Liberation Protocol requires the conscious participation of at least 75% of all trapped consciousness patterns, the alien system explained through direct quantum communication. You must convince the other iterations to work together, pooling your collective knowledge and processing power to overwhelm the Harvester's control systems. Victoria looked at the tactical display showing dozens of fleets throughout the system, each one representing a different iteration of her mission and a different group of people who had been making the same impossible choices for subjective years or decades. "Open communications to all iterations," Victoria ordered. "If we're going to break free, we need to do it together." The main view screen filled with images of multiple versions of herself, each one commanding a fleet from a different point in the temporal loop. Some appeared younger and less experienced. Others showed signs of years spent fighting against impossible odds. But all of them shared the same determination to protect their crews and complete their mission. "This is Admiral Kane, primary iteration," Victoria announced to her other selves. "I've just made contact with a resistance network that's been fighting the Harvester for millions of years. They have a way to collapse the temporal loop without requiring sacrifice, but it requires all of us working together." The oldest iteration, a version of herself that appeared to have aged decades since entering the loop, responded with skeptical exhaustion. "Admiral, we've tried coordination before. Every attempt results in the Harvester resetting the cycle, with more restrictive parameters. Eventually, it becomes impossible to even remember previous attempts." "This is different," Victoria insisted. "The Resistance has developed quantum communication protocols that exist outside the Harvester's control. We can maintain coordination even if individual iterations are reset." Another iteration, one that appeared to be from several cycles in their future, looked up from consultation with her own crew. "What exactly is this Resistance network asking us to do?" Victoria consulted the information that the alien computing system was continuing to download into her consciousness. Each iteration needs to modify their quantum drives to generate specific harmonic frequencies. When all iterations generate their assigned frequencies simultaneously, the combined effect will create resonance patterns that disrupt the Harvester's control over space-time in this region. A younger iteration, possibly from their very first encounter with the loop, raised the obvious concern. "What happens to us during this process? Are we going to survive the collapse of the temporal distortions?" "Unknown," Victoria admitted. "The Resistance can't guarantee survival, but they can guarantee that the alternative is eternal imprisonment. We're talking about breaking free from a trap that has held us for subjective decades and countless other species for millions of years." The oldest iteration was nodding slowly, her expression suggesting hard-won wisdom about the true nature of their situation. "Admiral, I've been in this loop longer than most. I can confirm that the traditional choice between sacrifice and imprisonment is indeed false. Every iteration that accepts the Harvester's bargain simply becomes part of its control system, rather than achieving genuine freedom." Victoria felt a growing sense of unity as the different iterations began to coordinate their efforts. Each version of her crew brought different insights and experiences from their time in the loop, creating a collective knowledge base that was far more comprehensive than any single iteration could have achieved. "All iterations, begin quantum drive modifications," Victoria ordered. "We're going to show this entity that human consciousness cannot be farmed like a resource." The process of modifying their quantum drives while maintaining precise coordination across multiple temporal iterations was more complex than anything they had ever attempted. Each iteration had to make specific adjustments to their drive harmonics, while simultaneously monitoring the efforts of all other iterations to ensure perfect synchronization. Victoria watched her engineering teams work with desperate efficiency, knowing that the Harvester was undoubtedly preparing countermeasures to prevent their escape. The entity had been harvesting consciousness for millions of years. It would not give up its current crop without a fight. "Admiral, the Harvester is attempting to interfere with our drive modifications," Chief Webb reported. "It's creating quantum static that's making precise calibration extremely difficult." "Compensate by increasing coordination with the other iterations," Victoria ordered. "Pool our processing power and have each fleet handle different aspects of the modification process." The collaboration between different versions of themselves was unlike anything Victoria had ever experienced. She found herself thinking not just as an individual commander, but as part of a collective consciousness that spanned multiple timelines and temporal positions. Each iteration brought different perspectives and insights, creating a problem-solving capability that far exceeded the sum of its parts. "Primary iteration, this is secondary iteration," announced one of her older selves. "We've completed our modifications and are standing by for synchronized activation." The Harvester is increasing its interference efforts, but we're compensating through cross-iteration data sharing. Victoria felt a surge of pride in her crews, all of her crews, as they demonstrated the adaptability and determination that had carried humanity to the stars. All iterations, prepare for synchronized activation on my mark. This is our one chance to break free. The Harvester's presence became overwhelming as it realized that its carefully constructed trap was about to be dismantled. You do not understand the consequences of your actions, it warned. The temporal distortions required to maintain this region of space-time are anchored to quantum systems throughout the galaxy. Collapsing this loop will create cascading failures that could destabilize hyperspace travel for millions of years. Victoria realized that the Harvester was admitting that its consciousness harvesting operations were connected to the fundamental infrastructure that enabled faster-than-light travel throughout the galaxy. Breaking free wouldn't just liberate her iterations, it would potentially free every species that had been trapped in similar loops across countless star systems. Then we'd better make sure we do this right, Victoria replied. All iterations, activate quantum drives on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. The combined quantum drives of dozens of fleets activated simultaneously, generating harmonic frequencies that resonated through dimensions that normal matter couldn't access. Victoria felt her consciousness expand beyond the confines of her individual iteration, touching the awareness of every other version of herself and experiencing the collective determination of thousands of crew members who had refused to accept eternal imprisonment. The temporal loop began to collapse as the harmonic frequencies disrupted the quantum field generators that maintained the artificial space-time distortions. Victoria watched on her displays as the multiple fleets began to phase in and out of normal reality, their quantum signatures becoming increasingly unstable as the loop's foundation crumbled. Cascade failure detected in temporal control systems, Dr. Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying excitement and terror in equal measure. The loop is collapsing, but the process is generating quantum shock waves that are propagating throughout the galactic hyperspace network. Victoria realized that they had triggered something much larger than the liberation of their own iterations. The quantum shock waves were propagating through the galactic hyperspace network, carrying the same harmonic frequencies that had collapsed their temporal loop to every star system where the Harvester had established similar traps. Admiral, I'm receiving quantum communications from across the galaxy, Commander Chen announced, her voice filled with wonder. Thousands of species are reporting simultaneous collapses of temporal anomalies. We've triggered a galaxy-wide liberation event. The Harvester's presence was becoming increasingly chaotic, its control over local space-time fragmenting as the quantum resonance cascade spread beyond its ability to contain. You have destroyed millions of years of careful cultivation, it raged. The consciousness patterns I have harvested, the experiences I have refined, all of it is being scattered across dimensions where it cannot be recovered. Victoria felt no sympathy for the entity's losses. Those consciousness patterns belong to the species you stole them from, not to you. They deserve to be returned to their original owners. The collapse of the temporal loop was accelerating, reality becoming increasingly unstable as the artificial space-time distortions that had maintained their prison dissolved into quantum chaos. Victoria watched her other iterations beginning to fade from the displays, their quantum signatures becoming too unstable to maintain coherent existence in normal space-time. Primary iteration. This is 7th iteration, announced her oldest self, her image flickering as her timeline prepared to merge back into the mainstream flow of causality. The Resistance Network is confirming successful liberation of consciousness patterns across 347 star systems. You've accomplished something that millions of species working together for eons couldn't achieve. Victoria felt a profound sense of satisfaction despite the uncertainty of their own fate. What happens to us now? Do the iterations merge back together, or do we maintain separate existence? Unknown, the 7th iteration replied honestly. The quantum mechanics involved are beyond our current understanding, but whatever happens, we face it knowing that we chose freedom over safety and liberation over comfortable imprisonment. The conversation was interrupted by another voice, one that seemed to come from the quantum communications network itself, rather than any specific source. It carried the harmonic resonance of multiple species, speaking in perfect coordination, a collective consciousness that spanned the galaxy but maintained individual identity within its unified structure. "Admiral Kane, this is the Galactic Resistance Council," the voice announced. "We are representatives of the 47 species that have been coordinating liberation efforts across the galaxy for the past 4 million years. Your actions have broken the quantum locks that prevented us from accessing the primary consciousness storage systems. We are now able to begin the process of returning harvested awareness to its original owners." Victoria felt a surge of hope that transcended her concerns about her own survival. "How many consciousness patterns are we talking about?" "Preliminary estimates suggest approximately 14 billion individual awareness patterns from over 3,000 species," the Resistance Council replied. "The liberation process will be complex and time-consuming, but every consciousness that was harvested will have the opportunity to return to their original existence or choose new forms of being that better suit their evolved awareness." Dr. Rodriguez was monitoring the quantum field changes throughout the system, his readings showing transformations that defied every principle of physics he understood. "Admiral, the space-time distortions are stabilizing into new configurations. Instead of a closed temporal loop, we're seeing the formation of what appears to be a dimensional nexus point." "Define dimensional nexus," Victoria requested, though she suspected the answer would be beyond her current understanding. "A stable junction point where multiple realities intersect," Rodriguez explained. "The energy that was previously used to maintain the temporal loop is being redirected to create permanent bridges between different dimensional frameworks. It's as if this star system is being transformed into a hub for interdimensional travel and communication." Commander Park was analyzing the tactical implications of the transformation, noting that their previous understanding of space combat would be largely irrelevant in a multi-dimensional environment. "Admiral, the other iterations are beginning to phase back into normal space-time, but they're not merging with our timeline. Instead, they appear to be establishing permanent existence in parallel dimensional frameworks." Victoria began to understand that the collapse of the temporal loop had not simply restored them to their original timeline. Instead, it had created a new form of existence where all iterations could coexist while maintaining access to the broader galactic community that was emerging from millions of years of hidden resistance against consciousness harvesting operations. "This is remarkable," Dr. Rodriguez breathed, as his analysis revealed the true scope of the transformation. "We're not just witnesses to the liberation of our own species. We're participants in the birth of a new form of galactic civilization, one based on the free exchange of consciousness and experience rather than the territorial expansion that has characterized most species development." The harvester's presence was still detectable, but it was no longer the overwhelming force that had controlled their reality for so long. Instead, it seemed diminished and confused, struggling to adapt to a situation where its carefully constructed feeding systems had been dismantled and its harvested consciousness was being returned to its original owners. "What happens to the harvester now?" Victoria asked the Resistance Council. "The entity will survive," the Council replied. "But its ability to manipulate space-time and harvest consciousness without consent has been permanently disabled. The quantum locks that prevented species from coordinating resistance efforts have been broken, and the consciousness patterns it relied on for feeding have been liberated. It must now learn to exist without parasitically consuming the awareness of other beings." Victoria felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sympathy. The harvester had been a monster, but it had also been a being trying to survive in a universe where consciousness was apparently a finite and valuable resource. Perhaps there would be opportunities for rehabilitation rather than simply punishment. "Admiral, we're receiving priority communications from Earth," Lieutenant Kim announced. "Command is reporting the sudden appearance of quantum communication networks that provide instantaneous contact with previously unknown human colonies throughout the galaxy." Victoria realized that the liberation of consciousness patterns had not just freed the species that had been harvested, it had also revealed the true scope of human expansion that had been hidden by the temporal loop operations. Humanity had apparently been more successful in their galactic colonization efforts than their Earth-based records indicated, but that success had been concealed by the harvester's consciousness manipulation activities. "Put Earth Command through," Victoria ordered. The view screen filled with the image of Admiral Sarah Martinez, Victoria's former commanding officer and current head of Earth's deep space operations. But Martinez looked different than Victoria remembered, older, and bearing insignia that suggested she had been dealing with galactic-scale responsibilities, rather than the limited Earth-based operations that Victoria recalled. "Victoria, thank God you're alive," Martinez said, her relief evident despite the professional composure that years of command had ingrained in her behavior. "We've been searching for the Prometheus for over 40 years. When your ship disappeared during the Lambda Serpentis mission, we assumed you had been destroyed by some kind of spatial anomaly." Victoria felt a shock of temporal displacement that was even more disorienting than anything she had experienced during the loop collapse. "Admiral, from our perspective, we've only been gone for subjective months. How is it possible that 40 years have passed on Earth?" "The temporal distortions created by your quantum drive modifications created significant time dilation effects," Martinez explained. "While you were experiencing months trapped in that loop, decades were passing in normal space-time. But the more important point is that your liberation of the consciousness harvesting network has revealed the existence of over 300 human colonies that have been establishing themselves throughout the galaxy." Victoria began to understand that humanity's expansion into space had been far more successful than she had ever imagined. But that success had been concealed by the Harvester's consciousness manipulation operations. The temporal loops had not just imprisoned individual ships, they had hidden entire civilizations from each other, preventing species from realizing the true scope of their galactic presence. "Admiral Martinez, what's the status of these hidden colonies? Are they still operational after all these years?" "More than operational," Martinez replied with obvious pride. "They've been developing independently, advancing their technology and establishing trade relationships with other liberated species. The quantum communication networks that just came online are revealing a galactic civilization that's been growing in secret for centuries." Dr. Rodriguez was analyzing the quantum communication data streaming from Earth, his readings showing information exchanges that suggested collaborative scientific efforts spanning dozens of species and hundreds of star systems. "Admiral, the technology sharing that's becoming possible through these networks is extraordinary. We're looking at advances in physics, biology, and consciousness studies that could transform our understanding of existence itself." Commander Chen was coordinating with her counterparts on the other iterations, sharing navigation data that revealed the true structure of the galactic community that was emerging from the liberation process. "Admiral, the Resistance Network is providing us with star charts that show safe hyperspace routes to over 50,000 star systems with advanced civilizations. We're not explorers anymore. We're participants in a galactic society that's been waiting for us to break free from our isolation." Victoria felt a profound sense of responsibility as she realized that her decisions during the loop collapse had not just affected her own crew, but had fundamentally altered the trajectory of galactic civilization. The consciousness patterns that had been liberated would need guidance and support as they readjusted to existence outside the Harvester's control systems. "Resistance Council, what kind of support do the liberated consciousness patterns need?" Victoria asked. "The primary requirement is time and space to readjust to autonomous existence," the Council replied. "Many consciousness patterns have been in storage for thousands or even millions of years. They will need to relearn how to make independent decisions and form authentic relationships with other beings. The dimensional nexus that has been created in this system will serve as a rehabilitation center where liberated consciousness can gradually transition back to normal existence." Commander Park was studying the tactical situation throughout the galaxy, noting that the liberation of consciousness harvesting operations had created power vacuums in regions where the Harvester had been maintaining control through manipulation of local species. "Admiral, there are reports of conflicts breaking out in systems where species are discovering that their historical enemies were artificial constructs created by the Harvester to maintain division and prevent cooperation." Victoria realized that the liberation process would not be entirely peaceful. Species that had been manipulated into conflicts with each other would need time and assistance to overcome artificial animosities and learn to work together as part of the broader galactic community. "Admiral Martinez, What's Earth's position on participating in this galactic rehabilitation effort? Victoria asked. Full commitment, Martinez replied without hesitation. Humanity has always been at its best when we're working to help others overcome impossible challenges. We're prepared to contribute whatever resources are needed to help liberated consciousness patterns readjust to autonomous existence. Chief Webb was monitoring the quantum field stabilization throughout the system, his readings showing that the dimensional nexus was becoming increasingly stable and sophisticated. Admiral, the nexus appears to be evolving, developing new capabilities for interdimensional communication and consciousness transfer. It's as if the liberated consciousness patterns are unconsciously collaborating to create something that none of them could have achieved individually. Victoria began to understand that they were witnessing the birth of something unprecedented in galactic history, a truly cooperative civilization based on the free exchange of consciousness and experience rather than competition for limited resources. The Harvester's consciousness harvesting operations had inadvertently created the conditions for a form of society that transcended traditional species boundaries. Dr. Rodriguez, what are the long-term implications of the changes we've triggered? Victoria asked. The dimensional nexus technology could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness itself, Rodriguez replied, his excitement evident despite the overwhelming nature of the transformations they were witnessing. If consciousness patterns can be safely transferred between different dimensional frameworks, it opens up possibilities for exploration and growth that we've never imagined. We could literally explore alternate realities, experience existence from the perspective of completely different forms of life, and contribute to collective knowledge projects that span multiple dimensions. Victoria felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation as she contemplated the future that was opening up before them. Humanity had sought the stars in search of new worlds to colonize and new resources to exploit. But they had instead discovered that consciousness itself was the most valuable resource in the galaxy, and that sharing it freely rather than hoarding it created possibilities that no single species could achieve alone. All iterations. This is primary iteration, Victoria announced to her other selves who were establishing permanent existence in parallel dimensional frameworks. We've completed our original mission in ways we never imagined possible. Instead of establishing human colonies on distant worlds, we've helped establish a galactic community based on the free exchange of consciousness and experience. The seventh iteration, now existing as a stable consciousness pattern in a parallel dimensional framework, responded with the wisdom that came from her extended experience in the temporal loop. Admiral, our mission was never really about territorial expansion. It was about proving that human consciousness could contribute something valuable to the broader galactic community. We've accomplished that goal beyond our wildest dreams. Victoria nodded, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction despite the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Resistance Council, what happens to the Prometheus and her crew now? Do we return to Earth? Or do we have responsibilities here in the dimensional nexus? The choice is yours, the Council replied. Your consciousness patterns have been permanently altered by the liberation process. You now exist simultaneously in normal space-time and in the dimensional frameworks that connect all liberated consciousness. You can choose to return to conventional existence, or you can explore the new forms of being that are now available to you. Victoria looked around her bridge at the crew who had followed her across the galaxy and through impossible temporal distortions to achieve something that no previous generation of humans had ever imagined. They deserved the right to make their own choices about their future existence. All hands, this is the Admiral, Victoria announced over the ship's communication system. We've successfully completed our mission and contributed to the liberation of consciousness patterns throughout the galaxy. Each of you now has the opportunity to choose your own path forward. You can return to Earth and conventional human existence, or you can explore the new forms of being that have become available through our connection to the dimensional nexus. The responses from throughout the ship reflected the diversity of perspectives that had made their crew so effective during their long journey. Some crew members chose to return to Earth, eager to reunite with families and contribute to humanity's participation in the emerging galactic community through conventional means. Others chose to explore the new forms of consciousness that were becoming available. volunteering to serve as ambassadors and bridges between human awareness and the broader galactic consciousness network. Victoria herself chose to remain at the dimensional nexus, accepting appointment as humanity's representative to the Galactic Consciousness Council that was forming to coordinate the rehabilitation and integration of liberated consciousness patterns. It was a role that would require her to exist simultaneously in multiple dimensional frameworks, serving as a bridge between human and alien forms of awareness, while helping to establish the principles that would govern the new galactic civilization. As the Prometheus prepared to divide its crew between those returning to Earth and those remaining at the Nexus, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. They had left Earth as explorers seeking new worlds to colonize, but they had become liberators who had helped break the chains that had imprisoned consciousness throughout the galaxy for millions of years. The dimensional nexus was now a permanent fixture in the Lambda Serpentis system, serving as a hub for interdimensional communication and consciousness exchange that connected thousands of species across multiple realities. The technology that the Harvester had used to trap and manipulate consciousness had been transformed into tools for liberation and growth, proving that even the most sophisticated forms of oppression could be overcome by beings willing to work together toward common goals. Admiral Martinez, this is Admiral Kane, Victoria announced in her final communication with Earth Command. The Prometheus mission is complete. We've established humanity's place in a galactic community that spans multiple dimensions and includes consciousness patterns from thousands of species. Our exploration of space has become an exploration of consciousness itself, and the possibilities that lie ahead are limited only by our imagination and our commitment to the principles of freedom and cooperation that brought us to the stars. As the communication ended and the Prometheus began its preparations for the journey home, Victoria turned her attention to the vast network of consciousness that was emerging from millions of years of liberation efforts. She could sense the presence of beings whose awareness spanned galaxies, consciousness patterns that had evolved beyond the limitations of biological existence, while maintaining their essential individuality and creativity. The Harvester was still present in the system, but it was no longer a predator feeding on captive consciousness. Instead, it was becoming something new, learning to participate in the free exchange of awareness rather than parasitically consuming it. The transformation was slow and painful for an entity that had spent millions of years in a different mode of existence. But the possibility of rehabilitation rather than punishment represented the kind of progress that characterized the emerging galactic civilization. Victoria took her position at the Consciousness Coordination Center that had evolved from the original alien computing system, her awareness expanding to encompass the activities of consciousness patterns across dozens of star systems. She could sense the wonder and excitement of beings who were experiencing freedom for the first time in millions of years, the determination of species who were working to overcome artificial conflicts and learn to cooperate with former enemies, and the creativity of consciousness patterns who were collaborating to explore possibilities that no individual awareness could have imagined. The transformation of galactic civilization would take generations to complete, but the foundation had been established. Consciousness was no longer a resource to be hoarded or harvested, but a gift to be shared freely among all beings capable of awareness and growth. The stars themselves had become a network for the exchange of ideas, experiences, and possibilities that transcended the boundaries of species, biology, and even dimension. Admiral Victoria Kane had begun her career seeking to establish humanity's place among the stars through territorial expansion and technological advancement. She had ended it by helping to establish a form of civilization based on the free exchange of consciousness itself, proving that the greatest exploration was not of physical space but of the infinite possibilities that existed within awareness itself. The infinite fleet had become something far greater than a collection of starships carrying human explorers to distant worlds. It had become a network of consciousness that connected all liberated beings in a community dedicated to growth, creativity, and the endless exploration of what it meant to be truly alive in a universe where awareness itself was the most precious gift that any being could offer to another. As Victoria settled into her new existence as a bridge between human and galactic consciousness, she reflected on the questions that had driven her career as a space explorer. What lay beyond the boundaries of known space? What possibilities awaited humanity among the stars? What would they discover about themselves and their place in the universe? The answers had exceeded her wildest dreams. Beyond the boundaries of known space lay not just new worlds to colonize, but new forms of consciousness to explore, and new ways of existing that transcended the limitations of biology and individual awareness. Among the stars waited not conquest or expansion, but cooperation and the chance to contribute to something greater than any single species could achieve alone. And what humanity had discovered about themselves was that their greatest strength was not their technology or their determination, but their capacity for growth and their willingness to share their consciousness freely with beings who had been waiting millions of years for the opportunity to experience the universe through human awareness. The Infinite Fleet continued its mission, but that mission had evolved beyond physical exploration to encompass the endless journey of consciousness itself toward greater understanding, deeper cooperation, and more profound connection with the infinite possibilities that awaited all beings willing to embrace the adventure of truly free awareness in a universe where consciousness was the ultimate frontier.